The snow didn't fall, it waited. It hovered in the air like breath held too long, then dropped all at once. Thick and silent, smothering the world in cold. That night, under the red glow of a winter moon, a child was born on the edge of the forest, not in a hall of kings, but in a hut with a leaking roof, where the wolves came close enough to listen. His mother did not scream. She whispered through pain, her voice steady like prayer. And when he arrived, eyes wide open, she named him Ragnar before her heart gave out. No midwives, no songs. Only wind. The old woman who wrapped the boy in fur said nothing. She saw the mark on his shoulder, 3 pale lines shaped like claws, and didn't ask where it came from. In these lands, you didn't question signs. They raised him in silence, not for lack of love, but because words, they said, could wake things better left sleeping. By the time he was 5, he'd learned to walk quietly through the woods, to listen for birdsong, and more importantly, for when the birds stopped singing. He'd seen a bear once, up close, black eyes, frost on its snout. He didn't run, he looked back, and the bear looked away first. Ragnar's father was a woodsman, not a warrior. A man who spoke to trees more than people. He had lost his voice in a raid long ago, a shattered jaw that never healed. But when he looked at Ragnar, his eyes held stories thicker than words. They worked side by side, felling trees, stripping bark, building fires that crackled against the dark. At night, the boy would lie awake, tracing shapes in the smoke above the hearth, pretending he could read the sky. He asked no questions. He waited for the world to answer first. One morning, the old woman who fed him fish, and stories told him his mother had been a shield maiden, that shed once fought 6 men in a village raid, and walked away with only a scar on her back and 1 missing tooth. She didn't fear blood, the old woman said, but she feared what she saw in you. Ragnar didn't understand, but he remembered the way she said it, not angry, not sad, just careful. That was the year the wolves came early. They came in the night, as wolves often do, not with howls, but with hunger. It began with a scream from the far side of the village, then another. By the time Ragnar opened his eyes, the fire was out and the door was already open. His father stood in the threshold, holding an axe he hadn't touched in years. The boy could see the tremble in his hands. They didn't speak. There wasn't time. Outside, snow turned red. 2 goats lay torn apart. The old fisherman who lived near the river was on his knees, clutching his stomach like it could hold in what was already lost. The largest wolf Ragnar had ever seen stood a few feet away, breathing like a bellows, eyes bright with winter fire. Ragnar's father didn't hesitate. He stepped forward. It wasn't a battle. It was a sentence. The axe swung. The wolf dodged. The second wolf, unseen, came from behind. By the time the boy reached him, it was over. The others found Ragnar crouched over his father's body, not crying, just staring. His hands were covered in blood, but it wasn't his. The axe lay beside him, its blade buried in the neck of the second wolf. After that, the villagers started looking at him differently. They spoke his name like it was a question. He stopped eating with the others. He hunted alone. He spoke to no one for a year. But he grew taller, leaner, faster. And when another boy tried to take his knife, Ragnar broke his arm with a single strike. There was no ceremony. No punishment. Only a silence that followed him like a shadow. When he turned 12, he began climbing the ridge where no one else dared go. The rocks were sharp and the wind cruel, but at the top stood a stone circle, older than memory. Some said the gods spoke there, others said they listened. Ragnar said nothing, he just went. One evening he didn't come back. They waited 3 days. On the 4th, he returned barefoot, bruised, eyes sunken and hollow. But there was something in his gaze none of them had seen before. Not anger, not pain, conviction, the kind that doesn't fade. He didn't speak of what he saw up there, only that he had questions, and no one in the village could answer them. So he began preparing to leave. Ragnar left at 13. He didn't tell anyone. Just walked east along the frozen river with a satchel of smoked fish, his father's axe and a carved pendant he never wore. He passed silent hills and sleeping trees. The crunch of ice beneath his boots, the only sound that followed. On the 6th day, he found a trader's camp. They were not Norse darker skin, different speech and a map of silver rings in their ears. They eyed him with caution until he offered his fish and helped lift a broken cartwheel without a word. That night, he ate spiced meat for the first time and learned that men could lie with smiles. The trader taught him things his village never had: how to weigh value without touching, how to watch hands instead of mouths, how to know when someone was about to run. Ragnar stayed with them through spring, traveling from coast to coast. He saw towns built on stone, temples with painted gods, slaves sold like cattle. He watched kings with soft fingers speak of honor, while their men whipped the poor for stealing bread. One night, drunk on honey wine, the trader laughed. "You watch too much," he told Ragnar. "You don't blink like the others. You don't forget." "I don't want to forget," Ragnar answered. By the time he was 15, Ragnar had returned north, not to his village, to the circle of stones on the ridge. He built a shelter there, beneath the trees, hunted, read the stars, spoke aloud only when the wind howled back. Some nights he heard drums, not real ones, just echoes in his bones, dreams that burned like fever. And then one morning a stranger came. He wore a cloak darker than pine and had no eyebrows. His face was lined with dirt and wisdom, and he smelled of copper and fire. The man said nothing at first, just sat across from Ragnar's fire and dropped something wrapped in cloth. Inside was a blade, old, curved, too light to be for war, too sharp to be ceremonial. "You're not here for shelter," Ragnar said. "No," the man replied. "I'm here because the gods won't shut up about you." Ragnar stared at the blade. "What do they want?" "To see if you'll break before they crown you." That night, Ragnar didn't sleep. He traced the blade's edge until his fingers ached. By morning, the man was gone, but the blade remained. He left the ridge a week later. Not because he was ready, but because he knew waiting wouldn't help. Some things must be found on the road, in blood and salt in the eyes of enemies. He returned to the village a stranger, his hair longer, his voice deeper, his silence heavier. He didn't demand respect. He didn't ask for a place, he simply watched. And when the elders gathered to speak of raiders seen off the coast, Ragnar stood and said, "Then it's time we become more than stories." No one argued. Because sometimes, even before a crown, men recognize a king. They did not welcome him with cheers, no songs, no feasts. Just wary glances and a space by the fire no one dared to sit in. Time had changed him, but it had changed them too. The village had grown quieter, more fearful. Raiders from the south had burned 2 fishing camps in the last month. Traders brought news of slavers in the hills. Even the weather turned strange late frosts. Early storms, fear made men small. And small men don't trust those who walk like giants. Ragnar listened more than he spoke. He watched as the elders argued over firewood and fish, as they begged the gods with old words that no longer stirred the wind. He saw how men sharpened blades they never dared to raise. One evening, the eldest of them, Jorund, white-bearded and brittle, told Ragnar, "You speak of war, but you've never led men. You speak of gods, but you walk alone." "I don't need followers," Ragnar said. "I need believers." "And who would believe in you?" Ragnar didn't answer. He walked out of the hall, climbed the ridge where the stone still stood, and stayed there until the frost turned his breath to glass. The next morning, 2 young men waited at the base of the hill. They didn't speak, just nodded, followed him back. The day after that, there were 5. By the end of the week, 10, not soldiers, not heroes, but men who had nothing left to fear. They trained in silence. No drums, no chants, just steel on wood, boot prints in mud, and eyes that burned with something older than courage. When Jorund heard, he summoned Ragnar again. "This will bring fire," the elder warned. "The kings across the water will not ignore you. I'm counting on it," Ragnar replied. He smiled then, not with joy, with certainty. Because what he was building wasn't an army, it was a storm. The storm had a shape. It wasn't a fleet. Not yet. It was wood piled in secret. Rope soaked in oil, and maps carved into bones by candlelight. Ragnar and his growing circle worked in the shadow of the ridge, where no one dared to interrupt them. He taught them to fight, but more than that, to move. Not with rage, but with rhythm. Not to shout, but to strike. To watch the man, not the sword. Some of them bled. One nearly lost an eye, but none of them left. One night, as they sat around the fire, one of the boys, barely 17, asked Ragnar, "Why us?" Ragnar looked at him through the flames. "Because you're still hungry." That same week, a child from the village went missing. They found his body near the edge of the woods, torn, gnawed, discarded like meat. The people cried out. They blamed wolves, then witches, then fate. But one of the elders, not Jorund, but the bitter one with bad eyes, whispered, "This didn't happen before he returned." By the next morning, smoke rose from the edge of the camp. Someone had burned the logs Ragnar's men had gathered. The ropes were cut. The carved maps smashed. Ragnar didn't speak. He only picked up the pieces and kept building. That night, the boy who'd asked why us stood watch alone. He didn't see who slit his throat, only that he bled fast. They buried him with his axe. Ragnar stood over the grave, silent. Then he said, "If they fear fire, well, bring thunder." He walked into the longhouse that evening, threw the burned rope at Jorun's feet, and said, "This village won't survive the next raid, and what do you propose?" "A name." Jorund frowned. "What name?" "One that kings will remember," Ragnar said, "even when their hulls are ash." They built the boat in silence, not because they feared being heard, but because the work itself demanded it. Every strike of the hammer was a prayer. Every rope tied was a promise. They carved the prow like a serpent, teeth bared, eyes wide, not for fear, but memory, so the sea would remember who dared cross it. Ragnar worked beside them. He didn't give orders. He showed with his hands. When the mast was raised, he tied the final knot himself. Tight, precise, permanent. The first time the boat touched water, the tide pulled it like it belonged there. That night, the village watched from the hills. No one dared stop them. Even Jorund stayed quiet. "You'll die out there," someone whispered. Ragnar heard. He didn't turn. "We all die," he said, "but not all names echo." Before dawn, they loaded the boat with salted meat, fish oil, weapons, and one black banner with no symbol. "Why no mark?" asked one of the men. "Because the mark comes after," Ragnar said. As they pushed off, the wind caught the sail like it had been waiting. The water opened ahead, smooth and cold, and behind them the land stayed still. Ragnar stood at the prow, eyes fixed on the horizon. He didn't smile, but in his chest, something lit. Not fire, clarity. Because the world would no longer ask who he was. It would remember. The sea was not gentle. It rolled beneath them like a living thing, groaning, testing, always ready to swallow. Most of the men had never left the coastline. Their hands knew axes and ropes, but not oars. Their eyes knew snow and soil, not horizon and mist. Ragnar said little. When one of them vomited over the side for the third time, he only said, "Good. Empty yourself. We carry no weakness." The boat creaked like it disagreed. Salt gnawed at the wood. The wind changed direction twice in the first day, and once they had to bail water with helmets. But they did not turn back, because Ragnar didn't turn back. Each night they drifted beneath stars that blinked like old gods. They slept in shifts, ate in silence, hummed no songs. On the fourth day, they saw land. Not a kingdom, just an island with smoke curling from the trees. Someone lived there. The others looked to Ragnar. He didn't give a speech. Just stood, tightened the rope around his forearm, and said, "If they greet us, we listen. If they threaten us, we answer." As they neared the shore, 2 men ran. One returned with a torch, the other with a blade. The torchbearer shouted in a tongue they didn't know. He waved his arms, pointed inland. Then the boy with the blade lunged. Too soon, too clumsy. Ragnar caught the strike mid-air, twisted the wrist, and drove the boy into the sand. No blood, just shame. He let the boy crawl away. The man with the torch dropped it, backed away, then ran. Ragnar stood in the surf, dripping, motionless. That, he said to his men, was a warning, not to us, to them. They moved inland slowly. What they found was not a village, but a temple. Stone, carvings, a god with a golden face and eyes too wide, and silence. No priests, no guards, just open doors. Ragnar stepped inside, touched nothing. Then he reached the altar and placed a single coin, the one he had carried since the trader's camp. Behind him, one of his men whispered, "Why leave gold? Because this god will know my name," Ragnar said. He turned back toward the light, and fear it. They returned at dawn, sails torn, faces burnt by wind and salt. No treasure, no slaves, no blood, only silence. Some villagers watched from doorways, others didn't look at all. But a few the children gathered by the shore, eyes wide, waiting for stories. Ragnar said nothing. He walked up the hill past the hall, past the fire pit where the elders still muttered about omens, and sat beneath the old ash tree, the one his father once carved. He unwrapped the temple coin and placed it on the root. No one touched it. By nightfall, the whispers began. Not loud, not accusing, curious. They found something. They were gone a week. No one died. They walked into a god's house and walked out. The men who sailed with him didn't speak either. They just trained harder. Ate together, slept beside their weapons. One carved new symbols onto the boat's mast. Another painted a serpent on his shield. Then, one evening, a man from a nearby village arrived wounded, exhausted. He brought word the southern raiders were marching, not just a band of force. 3 ships, fire on the water. Jorund called a meeting. He spoke of fortifying fences, of hiding the women, of sending a runner north. Ragnar stood. "No," he said. The room quieted. "We don't run. We don't beg. We don't dig holes like rats." "Then what do you suggest?" Jorund spat. Ragnar looked around the fire. "We sail first." They had 3 days. That's what the wounded scout had said. 3 days before the raiders reached the fjord. Ragnar didn't waste a minute. They rewrapped old shields, fletched new arrows, and hauled the boat down to the water. The villagers didn't stop them this time. They only watched, some with fear, others with something closer to hope. That night, Ragnar knelt by the ashes of the family fire and spoke not to gods, but to his father. "Tomorrow we earn the name," he said. He didn't sleep. By sunrise, the wind shifted. They launched before the tide could argue, sails snapping loud enough to wake every dreamer in the valley. Halfway to the mouth of the fjord, they saw it black sails, fast oars. Men armored in rust and leather. Ragnar stood at the bow. This time he smiled. The clash was brutal. Oars splintered, steel rang. Blood misted the air like sea spray. One of Ragnar's men fell the youngest, the one who had painted the serpent. Another lost a hand but fought with the other. Ragnar didn't lead with orders. He led with motion, and when the final raider fled into the trees, it was Ragnar who followed silent, tireless, until the man collapsed. He stood over him. "No crown," the raider gasped. "Why follow you?" Ragnar looked down. "Because I don't ask them to." He turned and walked back toward the smoke, toward the boat, toward the name that now lived beyond the shore. And in the distance, the gods, if they were watching, stayed silent. But they listened.